So if BBC4 were to ask you in for a meeting, which they probably should do, and said, what would you like to do? What would you suggest to them?
I would, if I was given complete free rein, I would do like...
well, let's not go that far.
But I think you should have a Daily Show type show here, but you should address it at the British media, both the press and the BBC and the whole establishment. But I don't think it'll happen because it's not allowed.
Because do you think satire is slightly moribund now because, you know, I think we have a society that's actually not interested in that two-party system particularly anymore, and so much satire is still based on it. So much satire is based on kind of Westminster gossip and trivia and things like that, and actually there's other things going on in the world.
Sure, and I think sort of Russell Brand is tapping into that a bit of going, well, there's a higher level of this if, you know, you manage to get it out of journalism. I think it's not just a two-party system. Satire is trapped a lot in journalism. You know, it's quite telling that, you know, Private Eye, or indeed all the sort of panel shows that deal with topical stuff are all based around newspapers, you know, because we're trapped in that. The newspapers run on a Westminster cycle, and they don't tend to think for themselves. You need a show that thinks for itself.
Now, you have a very big presence on Twitter, and it strikes me that actually Twitter is something that can get underneath that a little bit, underneath that establishment, and Twitter can sources things from all sorts of different angles. Is there anything in that you think that gives us kind of a signpost of where satire could go?
Maybe. I mean, I sort of feel it's just quite isolating, Twitter. I feel if it really did anything, Cameron wouldn't be on there. I mean, if Cameron's on there, do you really want to be on there? If Cameron was in a nightclub, you wouldn't go, would you? Well, I would. I'd drive a fucking truck into it.
I'd go, look, it's David Cameron. I'd quite like to meet him. Quite fun.
Yeah, we would go. But, you know...
if you and I walked past a nightclub and David Cameron was inside dancing, we'd both go, let's go.
If he was dancing, that's different. You know, if he was dancing, the equivalent of dancing on Twitter, like putting up hashtag games and stuff like that, it'd be fucking great, you know?
But I think the very fact that Cameron is on Twitter is interesting. Because, you know, Cameron every morning, every Prime Minister there's ever been, will be bought in the Times and the Telegraph, and they'll read in that, and Prime Ministers in more recent years will also be bought in the Sun and the Mirror, and they'll read that. And, you know, there's now this forum where there's all sorts of voices, and there's all sorts of people talking, and there's all sorts of things which can kind of catch light. And do you not think they're being exposed to more kind of interesting voices there?
Yeah,
how many followers have you got on Twitter?
Like 1.5 million or something?
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, but I think it might just lose relevance because people follow so many people. Like even me, I'm not that hugely interested in things, and I've got 500 people, because you've got to follow all of the Wu-Tang Clan. So it'll just sort of, you'll become more of a little flavour in a stew, and maybe that's not a bad thing.
I might set up a site that aggregates the tweets of the Wu-Tang Clan just for you, just to save you a little bit of time. Of course, the other place we're going to get new comedy from, perhaps not specifically satire, is BBC Three, which has been the home of new comedy for quite yes, I can exclusively reveal it's been destroyed. And now Zy Bennett has called that a massive strategic mistake.
Yeah.
Do you think it is?
Yeah, it's a disaster. I mean, because you're abandoning, you've got channels that have really high average ages. I don't know what they are, but they're
I think BBC
incredibly
One
old.
is mid to late 50s now, I think.
And so the one channel you had that was competing against new technology, you're saying, we're going to abandon that, we're going to get rid of its budget, and we're going to plough that into the new technology that we're trying to compete against. So you're trying to keep those 25-year-old average viewers watching your television shows. You know, you're not trying to drag them onto the platform that they're watching the other stuff that they're going to watch instead of the BBC. I mean, it's just the worst fucking decision that they could have possibly made. And I think those things are communications, you know? It's a communication going, don't worry, we're not going to do anything interesting. You know, they're trying to say that to the government or the next government that comes in. Don't worry, we're going to hunker down and do absolutely nothing. And I think when the government came in this time and made them pay for the World Service, that was a message. You know, that was, you know, it's part of BBC's soft power. And loads of those people in the BBC high up are people who would have been civil service mandarins back in the day. And they understand that as a communication of going, you're supposed to be on side. And then now they are firmly on side.
So they've got smaller budgets, they've got to get rid of something. What do you think would be culled before BBC Three? Where would you make the cuts?
I would cull a lot of their senior management and their pensions. I would get rid of a lot of hopeless people in there who are stopping good people from doing their job. And I mean, part of their job is just to hold their hands up to stuff. I watched some clips of the TV festival just for this, and there's like Alan Yentob and all these people like from previous years going, oh, isn't it terrible there's no women on TV, and isn't it terrible there's no black people? And you went, wait a minute, you're the creative head of the BBC. Don't just go, isn't it terrible? It's your job to do something about it. But they see their job is to do nothing about it.
You don't think counterintuitively that they're trying to do something there? Obviously, they've got a smaller pot to pay out, and they're thinking, you know what, this TV is going to go online. Eventually, BBC Three would be a good place to start that. It will save us money and also make us more relevant at the same time.
They should have put the same budget into online if they were going to do it, and actually make some interesting stuff to try and keep their future audience. Because, you know, you've got people now who are growing up who will just go, oh yeah, TV, my big brother used to have one of those. You know, and they just won't be engaged with it in the same way.
You just done some internet TV, didn't you? You did some iPlayer special
I did
with Bob Mortimer. What was that experience like?
That was brilliant. It was brilliant meeting Bob Mortimer.
And did you find that people got in your way as much as they do on traditional TV, or were you left to your own devices a bit more?
No, we filmed it in like 3 hours or something.
But you know, is that not the future though? The fact is, if we do these things online, suddenly it's like when we made Channel 4, we made Big Brother for Channel 4 for many years, and every day you'd be in the papers and getting grief about it. The second it moved to Channel 5, no one cared anymore, so you can do what you want. And would that not be the same slightly with comedy if it's slightly removed from the BBC and it's online? Doesn't give you that freedom that people talked about in the 60s and the 70s, and comedy might come back?
Well, let's hope so, but I mean, all I know is I'm doing a show online with the iPlayer at the minute, and we're told that the compliance is exactly the same as BBC Two.
But you found the process not so?
Yeah, I think if you're making a 5-minute film about peas, they're probably going to lay off a bit rather than if you want to do a political show. Do
you think Yentob didn't get directly involved?
Yeah, no, I don't think he's directly involved in a lot of things.
Now, you're just talking about diversity and what have you. Now, women on panel shows, this is the thing that's come up this year, and a quota of having women on panel shows. And you've worked in comedy for many years, stand-up, and on TV. What's your view on that?
It's just the wrong quota. It's the wrong quota. Make it 50-50. You know, how hard can it be? It's not that difficult. Like, most panel shows are edited towards the principals. Right? And most of the principals phone up and make sure they're edited towards them anyway. And all you're really looking for from your guests is 5 or 6 contributions an episode. And in an edit, over the course of 3 hours, how hard is it to get female panellists? I like quotas because quotas put the responsibility onto broadcasters who have a lot of money instead of onto comedians who are really struggling. So the idea of going, oh, this woman who's travelling about comparing at the Frog and Bucket or whatever the fuck she's got to do isn't quite tailoring herself well enough to slot directly into whoever's seat on my panel show. Suddenly the onus is on the people who are making the show. I like that.
Yeah, well, I agree. I have to say, I mean, in defence of some panel show producers, for many years there have been fewer female stand-ups, which has been a problem of the comedy industry. And fantastic now when you go out. I've been at the festival last week. It's extraordinary. I think it's a 62% increase in female stand-ups, and it's not something that's even being talked about anymore. And hopefully that's a thing that 5 years time people will go, what were you even talking about?
Well, I saw a lot of resistance in there. So like I presented Nevermind the Buzzcocks a couple of times, and I tried to get a female comedian on both times, and they were just not having it. I was trying to get Sarah Millican on, and eventually I think on the 3rd phone call they just said, or they implied, I'd be sacked and I got fucking Richard Herring or something. You turn up, I asked for someone who has a cunt, I think there's resistance to it, and there's a lot of, you've got to remember, mainstream comedians, particularly ones my age, tend to be quite conservative people who've kind of built up a living almost as a small businessman. And they're kind of in that. I worked on a show as a guest where I'd come on, and the regular host would refer to the token women as cunty McNo-jokes, right? So that, if you're a woman coming on into that environment, that's stage 1 of what you've got to get over. And, you know, they've had a lot to get over for a long time, and I think it's time that the onus was put on the people making the shows.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think there's some older panel shows which maybe were stuck in the mud a little bit more than they are now. I think some people you have to force into it, and other people are on the side of good and booking the right people. But certainly I've had that experience as well, not as a woman. But then I know friends of mine who've said haven't been booked on stuff because they said, no, we've already got a woman on this week.
Yeah.
And you think that was quite common. I don't think that's something that would happen so much anymore. Do you think?
I think it still happens. I think it's happening right now as we talk.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Maybe on certain shows.
Yeah.
Maybe on certain shows. Now, Danny Cohen was also talking about, you know, we talked a lot about the responsibilities of people on television. And, you know, I think you've got more responsibility than you think you've got. That's definitely true. And, you know, I think you've been handsomely paid to be on television for many years, and there's a certain responsibility that comes with it. But he was talking about Clarkson,
Right.
who seems to me to be sort of your equivalent, but in kind of Alice in Wonderland world, in that he comes from a different side of you, but sort of does controversial things and is picked up on it, but he seems to get away with it all the time.
But without thinking. So if there's no content, it's fine. So I did a joke about Israel's last assault on Gaza. I did 2 jokes on a show called Political Animal. I was censured by the BBC Trust, and they called the jokes anti-Semitic, right, which they weren't. And I wrote a response. Clarkson tells a nursery rhyme that ends in the word nigger, and the controller of BBC One is coming out to defend him and say he's not a racist. And the reason is, there's no content to what he's saying, so it can be defended. If you want to defend what I'm saying, you've got to actually talk about the situation in Gaza.
What would you do with Clarkson if you were his boss?
Sack him. You know, because he's a cultural tumour. You know, he comes from a very bad place, and the reason that he's tolerated is that he's recognised by people in power. They know people like Clarkson. In fact, he knows Cameron. He's a friend of Cameron's. He's in there like a fucking growth, and he should be removed because he's horrible. You know.
There's a counter argument which I will put to you. Which is an interest. It's not a defence of him, but it's an interesting sidebar, which is that's an enormously successful show for the BBC, and an enormously successful show for the BBC worldwide. But is it defended because you were suggesting he's a member of the establishment, or is it defended because it makes an awful lot of money for the BBC? It's a proper big money spinner, and it does fund an awful lot of other television.
Well, a mixture of both, but I wonder if they have the rights to the show without Clarkson, because if they had the rights to it, I mean, there's a certain feeling you get in television where people would be quite happy with 3/4 of the ratings or half the ratings. Do you know what I mean? Providing that they avoided the scandals. So I wonder if there's some rights issue with Clarkson. I don't know anything about it.
That's Clarkson told.